The following portion of the training is for input of data into a PennDOT gINT project file. We'll start with the Input Project tab. This is a screenshot of the Project tab. Just a reminder that the highlighted field, in this case the MPMS number, indicates that it is a required input field. Please input Project tab data where applicable and available. Scale factors are for scaling the horizontal, vertical, and properties text scales on the soil fence report on the Output Logs tab. These Output Logs tab soil fence reports are intended to be placed on cross-sections and profile plans. Note that the scale factors are not used for other reports. They are only for the Output Logs tab soil fence reports. In general, all of the scale factors should be the same and are to correspond to the desired scale on the soil profile plans or cross-sections. Note that a number of drop-down lists are available on the Project tab for county, project type, and company name to facilitate input. Input for the Coordinate Input System on the Project tab must be entered by gINT Professional Plus users. See the bottom of the screen help provided for entry of the correct coordinate system. The coordinate system that is most likely to be used is PA83-NF-NAD83 or PA83-SF-NAD83, depending on the county. The help information at the bottom of the screen can help you make the distinction between North NF and South SF. If another coordinate system, such as HARN, H-A-R-N, was used during the survey, please enter this coordinate system, not the PA-NF-NAD83 system. Note that data entry may become very slow when you are selecting the coordinate system. On the Project tab, enter the county, SR, section, and local name. If your project is small, say for one structure, with all borings having the same SR and section, you need not enter the SR and section on the Boring Test Pit tab. However, if you are entering data for a large project with several structures, the SR and section may differ from the overall project and must be entered on the Boring Test Pit tab. When entering the company name on the Project tab, please note that the input for company name will be included on various reports following the phrase "prepared by." Enter the company name as you would like it to appear on the output reports. This is a sample core box photo log with an example prepared by and company name. Now, some guidance for input of data on the Boring Test Pit tab. This is a screenshot of the Boring Test Pit tab. Note that the required input fields are highlighted in yellow. For the Boring Test Pit tab, please enter the information as required and available. Note that additional input description for various input items has been included in the light blue portion at the bottom of the screen. Items with a yellow background are required input items, and items with a gray background are calculated with the gINT rule, with the calculations automatically performed after the user clicks on Save. On the Boring Test Pit tab, please be sure to enter the drive hammer type, that is, automatic, donut, or safety. If the drive hammer type is not entered, the hammer efficiency will not be calculated. If the drive hammer type is not entered, the hammer efficiency will not be calculated, and the N60 will not appear on the reports. As a reminder, use the drop-down menus when available to minimize data entry errors. On the Boring Test Pit tab, note that the surface elevation is a required field. In some cases, the actual surface elevation is not known at the time of data entry. If so, please enter an approximate value and then update the surface elevation with the correct actual value when it is known. Note, if the surface elevation is changed on the Boring Test Pit tab, the user must also update the calculations performed on the Water Levels tab. To update the calculation performed on the Water Levels tab using the surface elevation taken from the Boring Test Pit tab, click on the Water Levels tab, and then click on gINT Rules at the top of the gINT screen, and then Recalculate Current Table from the drop-down menu. The water level elevation field on the Water Levels tab will be recalculated using the new surface elevation. Note the location of the gINT rules on the toolbar located at the top of the screen and the location of the cells highlighted in gray that are to be recalculated. Please click on the screen and click on the play button to view a video demonstrating recalculating the gINT rules on the Water Level tab. Now, back to the input of items for the Boring Test Pit tab. In many cases, when time is input on the Boring Test Pit tab, it includes hours and minutes in AM or PM. Please include this information in addition to the date. Also, please follow a month, day, year, hours, minutes format when entering the times. Various reports include a calculation of elapsed time, so the date and time of the start or completion of a task are important. As mentioned before, gINT Professional Plus will convert coordinates to latitude and longitude and vice versa. The calculation is performed when the user clicks on Save. If data is entered in the Notes and Remarks field on the Boring Test Pit tab, it should be applicable to the entire boring. Please do not enter soil or rock layer specific descriptions in this field. The notes and remarks entered in this field appear at the bottom of the engineer's log and structure boring log. The yellow arrow indicates the placement of the notes and remarks as entered on the Boring Test Pit tab on the engineer's log. Next, we'll cover the Sample tab. This is a screenshot showing the Input Sample tab. Please enter the sample start depth, the top of the sample end depth, the bottom of the sample, the type of sample, the sample material type, which is used in conjunction with the sample increment on the logs, the soil recovery length, the rock recovery length, and the RQD length. Please note that the user does not need to compute the percent recovery for soil or the percent recovery for rock. The user does not need to compute the percent RQD for rock. The values are calculated for percent recovery for soil and rock and percent RQD for rock when the reports are produced on the Output tab. Please do not include percent recovery and percent RQD in any input value. For the blows first, second, third, etc., if there are no blows, please leave the input field blank. As shown on the slide, if there are no blows second or third, please leave the input cell blank. Please do not enter X or 0 to indicate that no input exists for an item in the blows first, second, third, or fourth fields. The output reports will show 50-X-X or 50-0-0 for the blows, not 50 over 0.2 feet. Also, note that a drop-down menu containing weight of hammer and weight of rod is available on the blows first through blows fourth input items. Please do not enter the blow count and the accompanying length in blows columns. Enter only the blows first, second, third, etc. as shown on the next slide. See the examples of correct input for blow count without the length and incorrect input. Please click on the screen and then click on Play to view the video demonstrating input for weight of rod or weight of hammer. Now, the Soils Description tab. This is a screenshot showing the Soils Description tab. Note that most of the items on the Soil Description tab require the use of the drop-down menu. The limitations on the input field help the user to follow the Publication 222 Materials Description conventions. The soil description format and the descriptors used provide information relative to the amount, the percentage, of each constituent in the soil. The primary constituent begins the material description and is capitalized and bolded. If there is a secondary soil constituent comprising greater than 35% of the material, please use the Soil2 fraction descriptor of AND. Otherwise, use the fraction descriptor for some, little, or trace as necessary. The Soil2 fraction descriptor is limited to AND. Users should enter the soil fraction descriptor and only when Soil2, the second constituent, comprises greater than 35% of the soil being described. For non-primary soil constituents, That is, for those constituents each comprising less than 35% of the soil, enter soil 3, 4, or 5 as applicable, and the soil fraction descriptor 3, 4, or 5 as applicable. The graphic symbols for soils that appear on the output reports for various logs and fences are entered on the Soil Description tab. Note that in the drop-down menu for the graphic symbols, the abbreviations for the graphic symbols precede the names. This was done to aid in locating the correct symbol. The primary soil constituents are capitalized in the graphic symbol abbreviations. A graphic symbol corresponding to the material's description should always be entered. Graphic symbols are available for void or no recovery results. Be sure to enter the proper graphic symbol for the material or condition. If a graphic symbol is not entered, the areas of the reports that are supposed to contain the graphic symbol will be blank. That is, if a graphic symbol is not entered, it will not appear on the reports. This is a screenshot featuring the graphic symbol input field. While the current soils description is extensive, it is not all-inclusive. There are two areas for users to insert remarks relating to the soil layers on the Soil Description tab. The Standard Remarks input field contains a drop-down menu with a list of remarks that are used with some frequency. Users also have the ability to add comments or remarks to the Standard Remarks field. The General Remarks field does not contain a drop-down list and is intended for users to place any comment or remark that may be helpful. The Standard Remarks field and the General Remarks field appear at the far right of the Soils Description tab. Standard Remarks and General Remarks from the Soil Description tab will display at the end of the material's description and are italicized. This slide shows a close-up of the Standard and General Remarks fields. The Standard and General Soils Remarks appear at the end of the material description and are italicized. For the most part, formatting of the input is handled in the reports, so users don't need to worry about capitalization, bolding, and italics requirements when entering data. When users enter any standard and general remarks, any capitalization should be included. Next is an overview of the Rock Description tab. This is a screenshot showing the Input Rock Description tab. Many of the Rock Description tab input items require the use of the items in the drop-down menu. That is, users are restricted to the list provided. This is to ensure that Publication 222 materials descriptions are followed whenever possible. If you aren't able to find the specific rock type that you were looking for in the drop-down list, it may be entered manually. That is, a rock type of obsidian is not available from the drop-down list, so the user should enter obsidian. In the corresponding graphic symbol field for the rock type, the user should select the graphic symbol for igneous rock. Please do not include multiple rock types or rock descriptions in the rock type input field. When describing a rock type, please use the available drop-down menus as much as possible. Entering a rock type of limestone or a rock type of limestone and rock 2 type interbedded with sandstone is a good input format as demonstrated in the figure at the top of the slide. The materials description follows Publication 222 Materials Description Protocols. Entering siltstone and sandstone in the same input field for rock type 1 is incorrectly combining two rock types in a field intended for one rock type. Please describe a rock containing sandstone and siltstone as sandstone interbedded with siltstone, or enter independent layers of sandstone and siltstone as they occur. Please do not enter rock descriptions that do not follow Publication 222 Materials Description Conventions. Entering a rock type of shaly limestone is not good practice. Describe the rock as limestone and select shaly from the rock structure menu. Remember, the intent of the must-use drop-down lists is to maintain a standardized description and maintain search capability of the database. Similar to the soils description, the rock description tab has standard remarks and general remarks fields. The standard rock remarks field contains a drop-down menu containing a list of remarks that are used frequently. Users also have the ability to add comments or remarks to this field. The general rocks remarks field does not contain a drop-down list and is intended for users to place any comment or remark necessary. The standard rock remarks and general rock remarks fields appear at the far right of the rock description input. The standard and general rock remarks are displayed at the end of the material description and are italicized. Now we will cover the input for the Water Levels tab. This is a screenshot showing the input Water Levels tab. Please note that the order or sequence of the input of the reading event on the Water Level tab is important, as the reading event field is a key field. If water readings are taken, the first entry for reading event, that is the first row entered, must contain the input 0-hour reading, whether a 0-hour reading was recorded or not. The second entry for reading event, that is the second row entered, should contain the input for the 24-hour reading event. While the drop-down list accommodates other reading intervals and allows corresponding information to be entered for those events, users should note that only the information relative to the 0-hour and 24-hour reading events are reflected on the output reports. If there are no water level readings, there are no water level reading events. The input for the Water Level tab is left blank. Here is an example demonstrating the requirement for entering the water level readings in a specific order. Note that row 1 on the Water Levels tab is for the 0-hour reading and is shown with the yellow arrow. Row 2 on the Water Levels tab is for the 24-hour reading and is shown with the green arrow. Additional water level readings can be entered, but they will not appear in reports. If there are no water level readings, no input is required, and the Water Levels tab can remain blank. On the Water Levels tab, the water level elevation is calculated by a gINT rule on Save. Cells calculated using a gINT rule are highlighted in gray, as is the case for water level elevation. When you click on Save and have initially entered data or have made changes to the Water Level tab, the gINT rule calculation will be performed. A reminder, if the surface elevation is changed on the Boring Test Pit tab, the gINT rule on the Water Levels tab must be recalculated. As stated previously, the gINT rule can be calculated by clicking on Save. However, the Save icon must be visible, not grayed out, when you click on it to recalculate the rule. An alternative method for recalculating the gINT rule is in the top header of the gINT screen. Click on gINT Rules and then on Recalculate Table in the drop-down list that appears to recalculate the gINT rule using the previously entered or revised surface elevation from the Boring Test Pit tab. Please click on the slide and then click on Play to view the video demonstrating recalculating of the input that contains a gINT rule. The Notes field on the Water Levels tab is displayed at the end of the report adjacent to the reading event. An asterisk is placed next to the water level reading on the first page of the engineer's log to indicate that notes appear at the end of the report. For example, the remark 0-hour water, 0-hour reading was not taken is displayed at the bottom of the boring on this engineer's log. Next, a discussion regarding the Structure Boring Top of Rock tab. This is a screenshot showing the Structure Boring Top of Rock tab. In general, the Structure Boring Top of Rock tab is used for placing discrete elevations or discrete values on reports. Typically, this would include items such as the top of rock on the engineer's log and structure borings, or other markers for elevations such as bottom of leveling pad, estimated pile tip elevation, bottom of rock socket elevation, etc. Note that the top of rock and estimated pile tip elevation may occur at the same elevation, but gINT does not allow duplicate entry of key fields. In this case, the key field is the depth to the point of interest, that is, the depth to the top of rock and depth to the estimated pile tip elevation are the same, but the depth cannot be duplicated in the key field column. As gINT does not allow duplication of depths in a key field, note that there are depth to point of interest and elevation fields. The depth to point of interest is the actual point that is reported or plotted on the logs and output reports and cannot be repeated. The elevation is the reported elevation value to report on the logs or reports that can be duplicated. To eliminate the error regarding the duplication of depths for the item depth to the point of interest, the numerical depth input for each point of interest is offset slightly. That is, points having the same key field depth to the point of interest are entered as having depths that are slightly offset by a small amount, say 0.01. The difference in depth is not noticeable when the report is created, that is, the depths are plotted, and the error regarding the duplication of input in a key field is averted. For this example, the depth of the pile tip elevation and the top of rock are identical with a depth of 22.5 feet and an elevation of 403.4. However, the depth of the point of interest, the yellow highlighted field, cannot be duplicated, so the depth to the pile tip elevation is entered as 22.5 and the depth to the top of rock is entered as 22.51. When the reports are created and the depth is plotted, there will be no noticeable difference in the depth and the elevation. This description of the elevation, 403.4, can be duplicated. Looking at the structure boring for the example from the previous slide, both the pile tip elevation and the top of rock appear to be plotted at 403.4. What if the depth to the point of interest is above the current surface elevation? If the depth to the point of interest is above the surface elevation, please enter the depth to the point of interest as a negative number. In the example in this slide, the proposed ground surface elevation is 11.1 feet above the surface elevation. Therefore, the depth is entered as a negative number. If the point of interest is above the surface elevation of the boring, the point of interest will be reported in the header of the report. That is, it will appear above the top of the boring. To create a legend to capture all of the abbreviations for the various points of interest, for example, top of rock, estimated pile tip elevation, top of leveling pad, stream bed elevation, and their corresponding definitions, a report has been created on the Output Graphic Tables tab for the General Notes and Legend that is to be used on the structure boring plans. Creating the output reports for the General Notes and Legend is discussed later. Now for the Lab Test Soils and Water tab. This is a screenshot showing the Lab Tests Soils and Water tab. On the Lab Test Soils and Water tab, ensure that you select the pertinent boring in the highlighted field at the top of the toolbar before entering data. From there, enter the depth to the top of the sample and the sample end depth, the depth to the bottom of the sample. Enter the lab results as available. Note that when you are entering the liquid limit or plastic limit for a non-plastic material, a 0 should be entered in order to indicate non-plastic on the reports. The plasticity index does not need to be entered. It is calculated using a GINT rule in the input. Note the gray background. Next, the Lab Test Rock Input tab. This is a screenshot of the Lab Tests Rock tab. Similar to the data entry for the Soils and Water tab, enter the depth to the top of the sample and the sample end depth, the depth to the bottom of the sample. Input test results as available. Next, a discussion of the Core Box or Test Pit Photos tab. This is a screenshot of the Core Box or Test Pit Photo tab. Enter the photos in the desired order and then click on the photo file to browse for the location of the photo to include in the reports. Include a brief description of the photo, for example, box 1 of 3 to accompany the photo. Enter the depth to the top of the core sample and bottom of the core sample in the input so that the corresponding depth range, as photographed in the picture, appears in the reports. Follow Publication 222 Boring and Test Pit Naming Conventions to ensure that reports correctly report boring for borings and test pit for test pits in the header of the Core Box or Test Pit reports. If the boring ID entered for the Boring Test Pit tab for a test pit is not TP, GINT will assume that the photos are of core borings and the core boring test pit photo log will indicate only the borehole identification for the test pit photo logs. If the boring ID starts with TP, the reports will indicate test pit. Following the Publication 222 naming conventions for borings is important. After entering the photo and depth information for photographs, the user will need to browse to locate the appropriate photo. Note that the core box photos are not contained in the gINT project file. They are stored outside of the gINT project file. Please click on the screen and then click on play to view a video demonstrating how to browse for a photo file. Next, we'll discuss the Test Pit Details tab. This is a screenshot of the Input Test Pit Details tab. This is a screenshot of the Input Test Pit Details tab. Information for test pits is entered over several input tabs, not just on the Test Pit tab. As before, the information should be input as applicable and available. In general, enter information on the Boring Test Pit tab. Enter a test pit identification starting with TP, test pit, following publication 222 naming conventions. Then enter the test pit depth and surface elevation. Start date and time and completion date and time for the test pit are to be entered. On the Sample tab, enter the start and end depth of bag samples and depth of pocket penetrometer and torr vane values. On the Soils Description tab, enter the soil layers and materials descriptions as usual. On the Rock Description tab, enter the rock layers and materials descriptions as usual. Finally, enter data on the Test Pit Details tab. On the Test Pit Details tab for the selected test pit, enter the excavation equipment type, equipment model type, test pit width and length, ease of excavation, seepage range, extent of caving of the sides of the test pit, and criteria for ending the test pit. Note that the test pit width and length are required fields. Any comments entered will appear at the bottom of the test pit form. Any remarks entered on the Test Pit tab will report on the bottom of the test pit log. Now, a description of the Grouting Log tab. This is a screenshot showing the location of the Grouting Log tab. Input of information on this tab is optional. If input is entered, the input is used to create the Grouting Log report. On the Grouting Log tab, select the appropriate boring identification numbers from the borehole ID drop-down list. Enter the start of the pumping time, the grout mix, grout quantity, if grout was pumped to the surface, and any comments or remarks for the grouting. Note the completion of grouting time is captured on the Boring Test Pit tab. The input also contains two additional tabs for entering data, the Additional Documents tab and the Environmental tab. Currently, any data entered on these two tabs is not reported. The intent of the Additional Documents tab is to allow the user to insert a placeholder for links to additional photos, documents, reports, etc. The Environmental tab is currently intended to capture environmental testing information for the project. Information is not used in reports, but may be expanded and reported in the future if necessary.